We're doing this series called This Is Us. And I don't know how many of you guys watched the program, the dramatic series, and you know, life is full of all kinds of drama, sometimes new beginnings, sometimes endings, sometimes a fresh start all over again. And every time you make any kind of transition in your life, there's stress involved. There's some kind of transition. Last week, we talked about marriage. And if you remember, we talked about when the day you get married or the day you got married, for those of you that are already married, when you showed up at the altar, you brought at least 3 things with you, right? One of those hopefully was a ring, right? Then the other thing you brought was a set of baggage that has your name on it. One of those pieces of luggage carries your hopes, the things that you've always dreamed of. The things that you've always desired, things that when you were growing up, when you thought about what family was going to look like, what home life was going to look like, what marriage was going to look like, you developed these ideas, maybe because you saw a great marriage in your own home. Maybe you read something and you saw what it could be. Maybe you got it from a novel, who knows? Maybe you got it from TV. But somewhere along the line, you developed a sense of your hopes, of what you were looking forward to, and the way the way you wanted things to be. The other piece of baggage that you brought into the relationship were your fears. And your fears were those things that were born out of the painful experiences that you went through in life. Those were the things that you went, I'm never going to let that happen. I'm never going to be in a household where there's all this screaming and yelling and hitting going on. I can tell you that. Or I'm never going to let a woman control me the way my mom controlled my dad. Or I'm never going to trust a man and be dependent on him the way that my mom was on my dad who abandoned us. I'm never going to put myself in a position of vulnerability and weakness like that. And what happens is, out of the painful experiences of our lives, we make these things called inner vows. Things that we say, that will not happen. I'm never going to be a part of anything like that. And when we carry these things inside of us, they just develop naturally over time. They're a part of who we are. As a matter of fact, for you, your baggage doesn't weigh anything because you've always had it with you. You've always developed it. For you, it's the most natural thing in the world. And the hopes that you've carried and the fears that you've carried, you think, well, this is the way things should be. You've got the script. You've got your idea of how things should unfold, and you carry that with you. And there's nothing wrong with this. There's nothing wrong with having hopes. There's nothing wrong with having fears. It's the most natural thing in the world. When it becomes something that hurts us is when we look at the person to whom we're saying I do, and we say, guess what you get to do? You get to carry this. You make my dreams come true, and make sure you don't trigger my fears. And the other person, even though you've never felt the weight of it, they feel it like an expectation, like a weight, like an ultimatum. Like, oh, I better measure up. I better come through. And when we don't get what we want, it leads to all kinds of unhealthy behavior. Sometimes we are just trying to convince the person. We will debate them. We'll argue our case, why things should be the way I want it to be. Sometimes we'll do that. Sometimes we'll coerce them. You better do it or I'm out of here. I'm leaving. Sometimes we try to get our way like that. Sometimes we sit there, we try to convict them, make them feel guilty. Well, you know, you really owe me after all. You really should do this. We try different ways of trying to get the things that we want. And it's not that these things in themselves are bad. They're natural, but it's the way that we carry them and it's the way that we impose them that make them so destructive in our relationships. And you know, when you grow up in a home where there's a lot of conflict, you take on certain roles. Some learn, well, to get your way, you've got to really power up and intimidate. Another member of that family might go, oh no, the way that you get what you want is I've got to hide. I've got to keep peace at all costs. And you find yourself in a marriage one day where your spouse looks at you and goes, well, what would you like? You're like, oh, whatever you want is fine. I just want to have peace. I don't want to argue. I don't want to have any conflict. I don't want to have any tension in our relationship. And what happens is you become a non-person in that relationship. And when they look at you and ask, what is it that you would like? You can't even tell them. When they say, are you angry? You say, no, I'm fine. And you lie. to keep peace. Why? Because in your family of origin, that's the role that you learned. And so these things we grow up with, we don't feel the weight of it or the burden of it because it's just natural for us. And so we come to our relationships, and by the way, this applies to your employer-employee relationships, this applies to your friendships. We all carry this stuff. But especially in marriage, these things, without any self-awareness of what drives our behavior, can become really toxic and unhealthy. And so what happens is, the question that is so natural, that lives inside of us is, how do I get what I want? How do I make sure my hopes come true? How do I make sure I don't get hurt or experience loss? How do I get what I want? But that's the wrong question. It's the most natural one. It's the one that lives inside of us, but it's actually the wrong question. And what you'll find is this, is healthy, happy, functional, thriving couples don't ask that question. They ask a different question. So how do you get to that answer? Well, here's what we'll see, is that Jesus, when he came, he was trying to help us to understand a different way of living, a different way of helping us to deal with these things. And Jesus, he was actually going to go to the cross. John chapter 13, Jesus is sitting down with his disciples. It's kind of those famous last words. You know, before you're going to go away or before you pass, you want to impart like the things that you really want people to hang on to. Jesus knew the cross is coming, and so he's imparting to them some things that he thinks are absolutely critical to them moving forward. John 13 and verse 34, he says this, "So now I'm giving you a new commandment. Love each other." Now, you may go, that's not new. Like, hasn't he been saying that all along? Isn't that as obvious as the nose on your face? Of course you're supposed to love each other. You're married. You're supposed to love each other. You're supposed to do that in life. But he's not done. He says, "So now I'm giving you a new commandment, love each other, just as I have loved you. You should love each other. Just as I have loved you." And he could look around the table at his followers and he goes, "Peter, do you understand what I'm talking about? Peter, you know how you had a sense of longing, that there was no purpose? You didn't feel a sense of purpose. You were a successful fisherman, but there was something missing. And I told you, hey, follow me. I'm going to make you a fisher of men. Remember that, how I gave you a sense of purpose? Yeah, I remember that. Remember how all the times that you made those kind of emotional reactions about how you were going to save the day? How I just loved you through it? How I spoke into your life and helped you to move beyond that? Yeah, I remember that. Yeah, I loved you, didn't I? Yeah. Hey, Matthew, you remember how you were like making all this money? You had it made. You were like extracting money from your countrymen. You were tax collecting, and you were like extorting much more money than you actually needed to extort. And you were a trader in your own country. You remember what that was like to be wealthy and to act like you didn't need anybody? Yeah, I remember that. You remember how I invited you to follow me? Remember how I helped you to find where real riches are? Remember how we've walked together? Yeah, I remember that. I mean, we're doing it. Thank you. Yeah, I want you to love like that. Yeah, Nathaniel. You guys don't remember Nathaniel. Nathaniel, you remember how when your brother told you about me, you said, "Can anything good come out of Nazareth?" Remember that judgmental attitude you had about where I'm from and where my family is from? Remember that kind of little bigotry that was in you? And how I still said, follow me. Remember how I loved you through all that? Remember how I saw your potential, guys, far beyond what you were living for? You remember how I just invited you in, and through every failure, I loved you through it? Remember how I've done that for you? That's what I want you to do for each other. That's how I want you to love. And he goes on to add this part. He says in 13 verse 35, he says, "Your love for one another will prove to the world that you are my disciples. Not that you're a disciple, not that you're a believer, not that you're a Christian, no, not those things, but that you belong to me, that you really, really follow me. It'll be evidence to the people, the way that you love, that the way you love is like a supernatural quality to it. There is like a capacity to love that is growing in you that people can't explain in any other way other than it is me that is doing it through you. And he says, people should see that evidence and be able to say, yeah, that's one of Jesus' followers. Look at how they love. Isn't it amazing? And at the very least, guys, this would be true in our own homes. That the way that you love your spouse, your kids should say, I know, Dad, why you love Mom the way you do. Because Jesus, right? Yeah. Hey, I can see, Mom, that you're a follower of Jesus because I see the way that you love Dad. I see the way you guys love each other. I could tell you follow Jesus. At the very least, our kids should be able to see it within our own homes when we really learn to love each other that way. And you know, it's hard to get there when we keep asking the question, how do I get what I want? That's the wrong question. Jesus says, you've got to go back and you've got to start with love and how you relate to each other through that. Peter, Jesus' follower, he breaks this down for us in his letter in 1 Peter chapter 3, starting in verse 1. Check this out. He says, in the same way, you wives must accept the authority of your husbands. Do I hear groans going up on that statement? And the reason that we groan is because we believe in equality. The reason that we groan is we have heard this kind of thought so corrupted where it's men are in a dominant position, where it's men are in a ruling position. We've heard this so distorted. This is something that is different than that. It's men were created to lead. Men have it in them to be men and to know how to lead. And he's saying, in the same way, you wives must accept the authority of your husbands. If you remember Big Fat Greek Wedding, I love the line in there where she says, yes, men are the head, but the women are the neck, and we turn the head any way we want it to go, right? So why does he say that wives should accept the authority of their husband? He's not saying men need to dominate you, men need to boss you around. That's not what he is saying. He's saying this is strategic by design. Look what he says. He said, then even if some refuse to obey the good news, like he's not living up to being a husband. He's not anywhere near what he could be. Listen, then even if some refuse to obey the good news, your godly lives will speak to them without any words. They will be won over by observing your pure and reverent lives. Here's what he's saying. He's saying, hey, wives, focus on all of your vitality and life coming through your relationship with Christ. He loves you. He is for you. You're his daughter. So focus on him. And here's what's going to happen. You guys ever eat a meal and then you drive by someplace and they're got barbecue going. There's smoke coming up and you feel ashamed because you're drooling and you just ate. Am I a glutton? What is the matter with me? Here's what he's saying. He's saying, ladies, when you feast on your relationship with Christ and you let him be your source of life and vitality, eventually your husband's going to realize that he's hungry for what you have. It takes time. I've seen it take 20 years. I've seen it take longer than that. I just recently saw it took 10 years in one relationship. Sometimes it takes much less than that. But here's the key. He's in the waiting. What he's saying is, go ahead, you give it up for God, you guys. What he's saying is this, it is strategic. You can keep asking the question, how do I get what I want? And he's saying, here's how you make room for God in those desires. Let me do what I can do. But you get it from me. Yes, he's not there yet. He's not there yet. but there's a reason that you play an important role. Now, when he said this, wives, accept the authority of your husbands, they would have all gone, oh, of course. Like, in that culture, women had no standing. Women couldn't be witnesses. They wouldn't accept a woman's version of anything. Men could divorce their wives for any reason they wanted to. I don't like the way she does her hair, or she doesn't please me anymore, so I'm done with her. And men had the right to do that, and women had no standing or say in it. So when he said this, it actually didn't cause any stir at all. You want to know what was scandalous? What was scandalous is what he said next. Because what he said next was this: in the same way, you husbands must give honor to your wives. What? Wait, I'm the boss around here. You must give honor to your wives. You have to see them as vitally important, is worthy of you giving your life to. You have to see them. You lift them up. You consider them and what is in their heart. That's what you do. See, this was scandalous. Guys were like, are you kidding me? And listen, we all get offended when we hear some of this stuff because we're all about equality. Do you want to know where the idea of equality between men and women came from? Jesus. He's the one that introduced that idea. The church, unfortunately, has taken that and corrupted that many times. But the fact is God says, no, you'll submit to one another because of Jesus. And this was a radical thought, that a man would look at his wife that way with such honor. And look what he goes on to say. He says, treat your wife with what? Understanding. As you live together. You know what he's saying? Husbands, your wife came to the relationship with hopes. And your wife came to the relationship with fears. Take the time to get to know what those are. Take the time to understand what she really longs for. And take the time to understand what she's afraid of. Because there's some pain in her past that has triggered those fears, and you're going to trigger those fears, and you think she's mad at you, and you think she's reacting to you, and she's not. She's reacting to what she is afraid you're going to do or be based on what happened to her. Men, you've got to find out. You've got to learn how to live with your wives in an understanding way. Find her heart. Let her know that she's worth pursuing, that she is the only one for you. And discover what's going on inside of her. And see, the greatest fear that women often carry is, will anybody really see me and value me? Or will they just look past me? And what Peter's saying is, husbands, you want to know what's strategic? What's strategic is this, is get to know her heart. Get to know her heart. Ladies, do you want to know what fear a man carries? The fear that drives men is, do I have what it takes? Am I really a man? And if that question doesn't get answered, they look for ways to answer the question. And so they do things. They power up, or they go out and do things that guys shouldn't do. Why? Because he's trying to answer the question. And when you believe in him, when you accept his authority and say, hey, you're designed to lead. Really, I believe in you. And when you begin to relate to him according to his potential, rather than the fact that he's not measuring up, something happens inside of a man when a woman believes in him. When a wife begins to say, I believe in your heart. Yeah, we've made some mistakes. It's okay. It's in you to be better, and I believe in you. He said there's something that happens when you make room for God, that God begins to come in and do something in his heart. Men, when you take the time to get to know your wife's heart, you're making room for God to begin to do something powerful in your relationship with her. It's this love thing. The wrong question is, how do I get my way? And the right question is, how can I minister to your deepest longings and your deepest fears? How can you minister to her deepest longings and her deepest fears? How can you begin to love that way? How do you do that? And see, that's not natural. The natural thing is, hey, you step up and you do for me what I want, and then I'll do for you. And it's like, you owe me this. Like, you owe me this. You should pick up my stuff and you should carry it. And when you carry my stuff, then I'll think about making some changes. And so we fight. And he's saying, make room for God instead. Ladies, believe in him. He's actually created to lead. Yes, he's not there yet, but he can get there if you're willing to place your trust, your faith in him. Guys, yes, you got to get to know her heart. When you get to know her heart, you don't have to fight for your way. Stop asking, how do I get my way? Start asking, how can I minister to your deepest longings and fears? How can I minister to your deepest needs? But see, that's not natural. See, the natural thing is, how do I make sure I get what I want? The natural thing is, I'm going to argue. I'm going to make you do it. The natural thing is, I'm going to make you feel guilty for not doing it. The natural thing is, I'm going to try to get you to feel obligated to give it to me. That's the natural stuff. But see, this is a supernatural thing, and Christian marriages have a different quality to them than the way everybody else does it. So he says, wives, in the same way, accept the authority of your husbands. Like, believe in them as a leader, even when they're not doing it. Let them know. In the same way, husbands, treat your wives with honor. It's a mutual submission. It's a mutual lifting each other up. It's a mutual believing in one another according to your potential, not according to your mistakes. It's a mutual thing. So he says, in the same way. Well, in the same way is what? Like, what is he talking about when he says in the same way? Well, in order to understand what he's referring to, you can't stay in 1 Peter chapter 3. You got to go back to 1 Peter chapter 2. And this is the thing that leads to the in the same way and in the same way. Check this out. 1 Peter 2:21 says, for God called you to do good, even if it means suffering. What does that mean? Even if it means forbearing with them. Even if it means being patient with them. Even if it means you're not getting what you want right now. You do what Jesus did. You hang in there. You love because of who you are. For God called you to do good, even if it means suffering, just as Christ suffered for you. He is your example, and you must follow in his steps. And see, what happens is we get caught in this thing where we go, I judge you for not measuring up, and then I withhold something from you. I judge you because you didn't come through for me, so I'm going to step back from you. I judge you because you didn't do what I wanted you to do, so I'm just going to freeze you out. And we get caught in this cycle where we're both judging and withholding ourselves, judging the other, withholding ourselves. He goes, that's not what Christ did. That's not what Christ did. Look what he did. It says, he never sinned, nor ever deceived anyone. He didn't scheme his way to get his way. He did not retaliate when he was insulted, nor threaten revenge when he suffered. He left his case in the hands of God, who always judges fairly. He made room for God in all of it. He personally carried our sins in his body on the cross so that we can be dead to sin and live for what is right. So the cycle of dysfunction that you learned in your home and the way your family did things, that can get broken. That you could be forgiven by God, that God can bring his power into your life and teach you a new way of doing things. You can be dead to the old ways of doing things, all the dysfunction, all the drugs, all the drinking, all the ways you try to find comfort, all of it. There's a new way. So we can be dead to sin and live for what is right. And he goes on to say this, and by his wounds you are what? Healed. You're made whole. And he's saying, this is how you love. He bore our sins. And rather than somebody trying to go take these, When you love somebody, you go, give these to me. I want these. Honey, I want your hopes. I want to know what's inside of you. I want your fears too. And you can trust me with these because I love you. I'm going to carry these for you. I'm going to find out what's in your heart. And I'm going to walk with you through all this stuff. And you may grab mine, you may not. You may take up my hopes and fears. Maybe you're not ready. But what did Jesus do? He took the first step. And he didn't wait for us to get our act together before he would demonstrate his love. He said, no, I am going to take the first step. He knew he had to make the first move. He understood our greatest needs. And rather than being in his position of, I'm going to judge and withhold, when you can be a good Christian, that's when I'm going to bless you. That's when he didn't do that. It says that while we were still sinners, Christ what? Died for us. No judge, no withhold. Instead, I care about what lives in your heart. And you can entrust it to me. And I'm going to love you. And I'm not leaving. And you might get mad. You might be hurting. But I'm going to just make room for God in our relationship. And I'm just going to trust him that he is going to heal you because of the way that I love you. And that's what Christian marriage looks like. Now, I'm going to ask you to close your eyes, if you would. And I'm wondering, first of all, for you guys, have you taken the time to find out what's in your wife's heart? Have you ever learned her greatest hopes of what your marriage could look like? Have you ever embraced those? Have you ever taken the time to find out why she reacts the way she does? Have you ever found out her fears? Taken the time to learn about the things that happen to her that cause her to respond to you the way she does? Would you take the time to do that? And would you be willing to embrace those things and to trust God that God is going to bring healing to your wife by the way you love her? And ladies, I know he's probably not all that he could be, all he should be, but you play a role in helping him. Would you be willing to encourage him, to understand that he was created to lead? He's just haunted by a fear that he will never measure up. And you can call something to life that is inside of him, a potential. It may not happen right away. It may take some time. But have you ever done that? Would you take a step and begin to believe in him, even when he's failed you? Would you be willing to make room for God and let him bring healing through the way that you love? And as you do these things, as you take time, would you ask God to let your hands be his hands, your words be his words? Would you be willing to willingly carry the burden of it? Say, I'll go first. Instead of waiting for the other one to go first, would you be willing to do that? Would you be willing to make room for God to do something absolutely beautiful and powerful in your relationship, where neither of you have to fight for your way, but both of you are lifting each other up and watching what God brings to life through that? And for some of you here today with your eyes still closed, maybe you've had a hard time with Jesus. Maybe you got a healthy dose of religion and condemnation somewhere in the past or at the hands of people. The good news is Jesus didn't come to create a religion. He came to create a relationship where you could actually know him. Let his love fill you. Let his power change you. Where you could have an a capacity to love that's greater than a human capacity to love naturally, but one that is supernatural. And if you want to step into a relationship with him, here's what I can tell you. Jesus Christ loves you so much that he died on a cross to pay for your sin. He didn't wait for you to get your act together. Jesus has been raised from the dead. He's alive today. He wants a relationship, and you're not here by accident. He's really looking for a personal connection with you. And that starts when you place your trust in him as the one who forgives you, the one who is for you, and the one who comes into your life. And right where you are, if you've never made that decision, you go, that's what's been missing. I hated church, but there's still a spiritual hunger inside of me. He's what's missing. And right where you are, you could pray to him and he will come into your life. I'm going to encourage you to pray something like this. Dear Lord Jesus, I want a relationship with you. I believe you paid for my sin and took the penalty for me that I owe. I believe you died in my place. And I believe you've been raised from the dead. And so I now invite you, Lord, to come into my life. I surrender. Give me your power to live the way you created me to live. Help me to find the purpose that you created me for and transform my life. From this day forward, I trust you, I believe in you, and I'm yours. And Father, thank you so much, Lord, for the way that you always keep your arms so wide open, the way that mercy is always available, and the way that you pursue us. And God, sometimes it takes a breakdown in relationships before we finally wake up and see our need for you. But we're grateful, God, that you are always ready and willing to bring us in and to teach us a new way. God, I pray for marriages in this room right now. Lord, I pray that you would so move, so transform the way couples are relating. God, give courage. Lord, it's hard sometimes for men to admit that they're afraid of anything. God, speak through their wives to help the men find that love and safety to state what lives inside of them. God, let conversations happen that have been waiting to happen for so long but haven't. God, may you bring such love into our homes that when people see the way we love each other, they go, that's the follower of Jesus. I see Jesus in the way you love. Lord, may you glorify yourself and make your name great through all of it. And we thank you in Jesus' name. And everybody said, amen. Give it up for God, you guys.